Hey guys, Phil Baumhardt here. So for today's video, I've got Bowie Knife Fights, Fighters, and Fighting Techniques by Paul Kirchner. So this is a really neat book, a proper book this time. You know, a lot of words in here. So if you are into pictures, this is not the book for you. But basically what it is a chronicling of the Bowie knife's use in American history from the time of its inception. Basically, Jim Bowie using a large butcher knife in a fight, all the way through to the modern era, and guys using combat knives in modern warfare in Iraq and Afghanistan. So the bulk of this book is, of course, going to be dealing with the quote-unquote American West. But the Bowie knife was most popular in kind of the period prior to the Civil War, where you had a lot of single-shot flintlock pistols and rifles. So if you had a firearm, you had one shot, and then, you know, a fixed blade knife is basically going to be your second option for self-defense. So a Bowie knife, you know, being a larger weapon, being a larger blade, is going to serve someone better. A lot of guys carried folding knives, clasp knives as well, but those are difficult to open. And actually, part of the reason that Jim Bowie started carrying a Bowie knife was because he was in some sort of a duel, and the guy who was fighting had a sword cane. They had both fired their pistols, you know, their single-shot pistols, and so the other guy was coming at him with a sword cane, and all he had was his folding knife, and he's trying to open it up with his teeth and keep the guy off him with his other hand. And then I don't remember exactly how that played out, but I think they were separated, or you know, whatever. He got him off him somehow. But then after that, his brother Reason Bowie had made for him a knife very similar to a butcher's knife, so no guard, just a long blade with a drop point. And so Jim Bowie would carry that knife around for self-defense. And then he ended up using that in the famous sandbar fight, and he killed one guy, actually the same guy that he was trying to draw the pocket knife on before. Killed one man, injured another with the Bowie knife, and that story sort of swept across the country in newspapers. And that sandbar fight made Jim Bowie famous, as well as his knife. And that whole story is covered in one of the very first chapters of the book. You know, the original Bowie knife fighter, James Bowie. So the book goes through kind of the Bowie knife's popularity and use throughout American history. He's also got profiles of Bowie knife fighters. So basically, anyone who used a knife in a fight, he's going to talk about them in this book. Basically describes what happens, and if there's a primary resource, he puts that in there. Usually a newspaper article or some sort of first-hand account. And then he's also got sort of the 4 greatest Bowie knife fighters with their own separate chapters. So the first one is, of course, Jim Bowie. And then there's Cassius Marcellus Clay, who was a politician and abolitionist around the period of the Civil War. And he got in the most Bowie knife fights, I believe it's a total of 3. And this book even shows, so this is one of his dress Bowie knives that he would carry. And then he even had his own knife design made up special for him, which is this one right here with you know, you have a D guard, you've got a double recurve and sharpened false and true edge. And the way that he carried it was underneath his vest, underneath his armpit, hanging upside down. And there was a little there's a little latch, a little release there, that when you grab it, that when he grabbed it in a fighting grip, it would release that latch and he was able to draw it out. So I don't know that he actually used that particular knife in a fight, but he loved his knives, and he clearly saw the importance of carrying a knife because he used it numerous times. So he was kind of a character, a very cantankerous guy. Even in old age, sheriff and some deputies came to his house to arrest him, and he fended them off with a rifle, pistols, a Bowie knife, and a cannon. So he was certainly not someone to be trifled with. So, and that's what you'll find with a lot of these Bowie knife fighters, is they're not particularly good people as we would see them in today's light. They were just sort of guys who like to be in fights, and when the knife was used, some of these fights got pretty nasty. So for the most part, anytime there's a primary resource used, which is, you know, to me, interesting to read, they don't really give any details of how the fight went. It's just this guy stabbed that guy, or, you know, this guy got cut, but every once in a while there'll be a neat little tidbit of information, like a blow being directed against someone's knife hand, so, you know, it disabled the hand that was holding a knife. You know, with a short weapon like a Bowie knife, I can see how that would be very common to be injured in the hand. In the Mexican-American War, the Texans would carry their knives in case they got lassoed by Mexican cavalry and pulled off their horse. They could cut themselves free, and that actually, it sounded like that happened a couple of times. During the California Gold Rush, there was a neat fight that took place with a John R. Davis, a veteran of the Mexican War, and he's described as being a first-class pistol shot and second to none in fencing. And on December 19th, 1854, he and a friend were walking through a canyon. They were attacked by a gang of 10 robbers from all different nationalities. So there was 2 Americans, 1 Frenchman, 5 Australians, and 4 Mexicans, and two Englishmen. And Davis had 2 pistols on him and a Bowie knife. Firing his 2 revolvers, Davis managed to kill or mortally wound 7 of the bandits. He then drew his Bowie knife and injured the remaining 4. And there was a couple of miners who give an eyewitness account of the fight, and they describe him disarming one of the other robbers who had a knife with sort of a fencing technique, and where the knife was thrown in the air. So they don't really give you the true details of it, and you kind of have to figure it out for yourself. And Kirchner kind of gives his interpretation of it. But that's just sort of one of the most interesting fights that was in there. And the only description of anyone being disarmed with it. So my whole thing with the blade catcher Bowie and being able to catch a blade and lock a blade and all that, that's never discussed in here. And hey, it probably never happened in history, but it's a cool knife, and I like making them. So one of the interesting knife fighters they do talk about is John Joel Glanton. And if you've read the novel Blood Meridian by Cormac McCarthy, he is a character who features prominently in that novel, and it's a work of fiction about a group of scalp hunters, American scalp hunters. Really fantastic book. You should give that a read. There's a lot of good Bowie knives used in that book. But Glanton was a historic character, and he's actually talked about in this book and in a first-hand account, primary source of a time that he knifed a guy. So this is a real fun read, just in terms of the history. And Kirchner did a lot of research, and he uses a lot of primary sources, newspaper articles of the time, and just gives you a way of looking at the use of the knife in American history that you wouldn't normally get to see, because the amount of research that he had to do, and searching through annals and historic records and stuff like that. That's something that very few of us are going to be able to do, and the amount of time it takes is something that is just not going to happen. So this is actually a really important resource for knife makers and knife aficionados, just in preserving the true history of the Bowie knife. He does have a chapter about Bowie misconceptions, where he kind of dispels the myth of the brass-backed Bowie. There's no mention of the Moore Bowie, the Musso Bowie, or even the Bowie owned by Phil Collins. None of the knives that are supposedly attributed to Jim Bowie, none of those are talked about, because none of that is substantiated. It's all the subject of legend. The book is only concerned with fact and provable points of view, so really important resource in that regard. There are a few pen and ink drawings by the author himself, so he's got historic knives in there that he's sketched, as well as some dramatic illustrations of some of the events that he covers in the book. So one thing that I was a little bit disappointed in is that he's got the historic drawings of Bowie knives from antiquity, but he doesn't ever give the provenance, like where it came from, where it was found, where is it now, just nothing. There's just a random drawing of a knife in the book, and it doesn't tell where it came from. But it's still neat to see, and what the book does have going for it kind of outweighs that. All right, well, that's all I got for you guys today. If you get a chance to pick up this book, I would definitely do it. I believe it's out of print, so it's only going to be harder to get your hands on. But if you do have a chance to buy it, it might be fairly expensive. So I thought this video would be important to kind of show you exactly what's inside the book. So, anyways, hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching, and until next time, be more Viking.